2, 1. Madam Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, everyone in this debate, except for my partner, has to understand that people are particularly different. Not everyone is progressive, liberal, woke, foaming in the mouth, and emotionally strong and capable to be able to forward social agenda, of which became the springboard of our path to victory and extension, wherein we told you quite simply it's quite fair and valid for people to want to opt out of these particular things and not contribute to the discourse that's happening, which can be toxic and can harm your mental health. That is to say that on side proposition, people are literally used as socio-political battering rams to forward social issues and expect these particular young people to solve the collective agenda of all of the world's problems. As what Andreas mentioned, many young people, particularly from a very vulnerable demographic, those from Gen Z, the younger Gen Alpha, and even younger millennials, really face bouts of anxiety and depression, even to the extent of, trigger warning, potentially self-harming themselves, or even in instances where they're literally able to take their own life because of all of the world's fucking expectations which are cast down upon them by virtue of being born as a consequence of the birth lottery in this world. Life is hard and people necessarily don't make that better. We need to understand people exist on a spectrum of emotional capacity and sensitivity. You know, the Overton window, wherein some people are more radical and progressive and left-leaning, some people are not as radical and essentially more conservative and want to opt out of particular things, and some people, majority of which are somewhat moderate and centrist in the middle, who kinda are in the gray area and in instances want to be able to stay silent and opt out of those particular things. These are the very vulnerable people that Andre talks about, who we think are so important, who might not even want to get involved in all of these particular things that you essentially expect or cast down upon them. Because a lot of these world problems, of which can't be solved in a single debate round, are largely systemic in nature. Meaning, we reject the premise or the lens that it's necessarily a collective action problem. It's not. It's often something greater than them, that because of reasons like the birth lottery and even things like the wealth gap, etc., and all of the reasons that the world is kind of us, necessarily fall on their lap and as a consequence become something that they have to deal with. Meaning, on our side, we're literally giving people the recompense and capacity to be able to opt out of all of these things that they can't control and literally be able to preserve their life and mental health. I think that's a relatively low burden but high impact for the very people who are most affected by this. That is your scope and scale weighing. Let's evaluate the deadlock of discourse that happened in all of the particular other houses. Because the frame that Andre used to talk about this debate is not path or outcome dependent on that discourse being good or even happening. Because the win condition of side proposition are that those things are essentially going to happen. But I think it's completely fair to say that if these people could be able to make some sort of change, as what a lot of the wokes and young people have done over the past 20 years, they would continue to do so. But they face what? Corruption, bad people, I don't know, America, no offense meant, a lot of harms like capitalism, which literally serve as the structural limitations that wreck them and impede on their ability to literally be able to forward things. And as a consequence, people tend to essentially want to opt out of that thing because it comes at the expense of their life and the things that they're ultimately able to do. And I think it's completely justified that they don't want to get involved in this discourse. Because if it's as toxic as side proposition portrays it to be, then if you allow them to continue fighting that, it becomes fire versus fire. And essentially it becomes very what? It becomes so adversarial and you aren't necessarily able to come up with a solution. Which is why this lens of being cynical and ironic and taking a step back and even in the worst case biting the bullet, being apathetic is a legitimate defense mechanism in order to be able to preserve your peace from all of this shit happening in the world, which you literally are tired of and don't want to do anymore as a consequence of it wrecking your particular mental health. Meaning, in order to resolve that discourse idea, I have a couple of things to say. A, it's speculative at best, and if their side portrays people to be so ass, it's probably going to be bad. B, even in these instances of it being good, then okay, it would still happen absent your particular role on that. Because I don't know, people are mature, people are able to like shift from their contrary stances, etc. But like, when was the last time you actually saw someone in a Reddit or social media setting really changing your opinion? I question the health and good discourse that really happens. Because if people are there, they're probably those swivel chair activists saying all sorts of things and dunking on other people. And we think the funny way in which these cynical individuals react to it is through satire and memes, which I think is kind of funny. The other side might say, nah, bruh, you're being racist. Yeah, but we think that's exactly where people are able to call them out, and if they still want to be a dick, then that's on them, that's on their moral compass. But in instances where these things literally allow them to take light a certain situation which has plagued them or even harmed their ability to live their life, it's a completely valid thing to be able to do. Meaning, it's only on side-closing opposition that we don't have a path and outcome dependency to this entire discourse thing particularly working out. In fact, in instances where it don't, unlock the benefits of our frame and extension at the point in which people have every capacity, motivation, and ability to opt out of this thing and preserve their peace and their mental health, of which harm these individuals. Yes, I know that it's not an actor motion, but to make it crystal clear, it's completely valid that the widespread approach of these things in pop culture and media legitimately justify young people nowadays to choose peace as opposed to being violent and adversarial. Take note, these things also respond and apply to a lot of what closing government mentioned, because a lot of the things that they mentioned about discourse are also contingent on things necessarily working out, and these things particularly being healthy. So, for all of the reasons that I mentioned, that things particularly aren't the best things in social media, it's completely justified and valid for people who want to be able to save themselves and essentially be selfish for their own interest. We are very proud to stand inside negative.